From On This Week in Cross Live to Scott Ritter, who's a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer who also served with the United Nations. Scott, lots to unravel here. It's early stages, of course, but Russia has called for a UN Security Council meeting today in light of the shocking images coming out of Bucha. What can we expect from this meeting, given that the French president, for one, has already blamed Russia for what's happened in Bucha and killing all of these killings on the Russian forces, actually?
Well, unfortunately, the Security Council of the United Nations has become part of the overall propaganda battlefield. And I don't think Russia can expect anything other than the opportunity to voice, its concern over what it is saying is a falsified story, unverified allegations. So Russia's taking advantage of whatever forum it has to get its version of events out. But I don't think I think the French, the British, the Americans, and maybe some others will do their best to muddy the waters.
And to be clear, in the midst of all of the he said, she said, the images and the situation on the ground there is absolutely horrific. But that said, Moscow has described the events as a blatant provocation by Kyiv to disrupt peace talks. Is there any evidence to back up this allegation?
Well, there is plenty of evidence. It just hasn't been collected, or if it has been collected, it hasn't been processed and presented. This is simple medical forensics. When you have a dead body, you subject that body to a forensic investigation, inclusive of an autopsy, that should be able to show the time of death, the mechanism of death, and if the body had been moved to that location, or if that's the place where they died. If the Ukrainians are making these allegations, one would hope that they would carry out these kinds of investigations, these forensic investigations, and provide that data to corroborate these allegations they made. The fact that Ukraine hasn't presented this data and instead went forward with a narrative based solely upon video evidence of unproven provenance, to me, is a clear indication that what we're seeing may not be reflective of the actual truth on the ground.
Speaking of that and the timing also, Russia says that there was shelling of Bucha by the Ukrainian military right after the withdrawal of Russian troops. If this is true, why do you think that fact has been ignored by Western leaders?
Well, again, because we come down to the fact that Russia has been very assiduous in its use of force during its military operations in Ukraine. I think it's clear that the Russian army has been under orders to minimize the potential harm that could befall Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. And whatever harm is befalling them at the hands of Russia is because the Ukrainian government has turned residential areas into battlefields, et cetera. So, Russia, I believe, clearly has demonstrated its intent to abide by the law of war. The Ukrainian government, on the other hand, has not, and they have opted to make residential areas battlefields and therefore use their own civilians as human shields. And this isn't me making this up. This is the Washington Post, which is notoriously pro-Ukrainian, having to admit what the facts on the ground are. So I think one of the reasons why the West is downplaying, the fact that it was the Ukrainian government shelling Bucha, and that, there's a probability that these dead civilians were killed by Ukrainians. They don't want that to come out. That's inconvenient to the narrative that they're trying to pursue of, a nefarious Russia.
抖音